This Ludum Dare, I thought I had everything going for me. A clean desk, a plan and a resolution. To lay off the coffee for a bit. And I was strangely optimistic that the theme would not suck for once. There was only a minor annoyance. I had to work on Sunday. Surely this wouldn't pose a problem. Or would it?
Witness the story of a man on the edge. A man trying to overcome his caffeine addiction for 2 days as he toils to finish his Lovecraftian prototype for Ludum Dare 37. Witness the post-mortem of the cellar.
It's no secret that I hated each theme so far. This time around, I intended to do something about it. During some downtime at work, I set out to partake in the last rounds of theme voting. It wasn't pretty, still I did my duty as a voter and tried to ward off the worst offenders. Over the course of many weeks, my home office has become a giant accumulator of just stuff. Books, Blu-rays, printouts, cables, and remnants of snacks long past. Initially I figured a little dusting off would do, but the months of not caring had allowed fractal layers of entropy to thrive and propagate. I couldn't even recall what the ancient schematics on my whiteboard once meant. The deeper down I ventured into the past, familiarity faded, and eventually I produced artifacts of a culture long obsolete. Ancient bytes on a floppy disk. Once I was finished in the realm of actual things, I continued cleaning up the virtual. Nothing should distract me on either desktop from focusing entirely on making my game. For the first time for a jam, I drew up a proper schedule to manage my time the most effective way. Ideally, there are 48 hours to work on the game and another one for submitting it. I couldn't use them all. First, I wanted to get 8 hours of sleep each day. Then I wanted to save at least an hour or two for quality time with Connie, plus 2 hours of driving and searching for a parking spot. Lastly, I had to include a big 8-hour-long chunk, plus traveling time, right before the deadline for a job I had on Sunday out of town. Whatever game I would have, it was critical for it to be feature complete before leaving. The leftover time between these blocks I had for making my game. Having a plan like this is great, because it feels my degree in project management was not entirely pointless. Planning feels almost like being productive. This was almost too easy. So let's up the ante. No caffeine. My creativity doesn't hinge on chemical stimulants, and my sleep should be much more restorative. Piece of cake.
Yeah, piece of cake.
At that point, routine steered my actions. Coming home from work with an hour to spare, and playing a good game to get in the right mood. As always, the theme would be announced at 3 AM local time to officially launch the competition. And I had my plan. But as soon as you have a plan, Microsoft throws you a curveball. 2:57 AM and Windows really wanted to install some updates. It could only take a few minutes, right? I would catch up. In the meantime, I checked Twitter for the theme, as usual. It was one room. Its announcement reliably wiped my brain like the update was wiping my custom settings right then. Once Windows had finished soiling itself, I had to face the music. Ah, crap. I needed coffee already. To numb the craving, I fueled up on coconut water instead and honey-coated cashews to attract the kiss of a muse. She didn't show up. Probably she was busy kissing all the other devs right then. I turned to Atari Artworks for inspiration, and while it was fun thumbing through the pages, I increasingly became bummed out at how much my own art sucked in comparison. Reliably, I hit rock bottom again, and I declared creative bankruptcy. Fuck it, let's just make a little top-down shooter. Despite never actually having made a top-down shooter, never having had particular fun playing one, nor really looking forward to the prospect of coding one. Hell, why not throw in some microtransactions as well, right? Yeah, the ideal mindset for a shit game. According to my schedule, I should have gone to bed with a solid concept and a roadmap in place, but in reality, I couldn't sleep and racked my brains for, well, something underneath all those nagging self-doubts. At least I had kept to my schedule when it came to sleep duration. The weather was mockingly cheerful, sunny, and way too warm for mid-December. The well of my creativity still dry. I reread the notes from the night before, trying to find something in them I had not seen. All I found was a bunch of typos and weird grammar. I had almost anticipated this in my schedule, so next up was exposing myself to a buzzing, changing environment to moisten my creativity. Nothing fits the bill better than a shopping mall on Saturday afternoon before Christmas. Lights and ornaments dazzled my senses, a rotating Christmas tree made me question everything, and stands and shops prompted reflex worries of "Shit, I need to buy Christmas presents!" Thankfully, my mind, hardened by years of procrastination, quickly shut off those thoughts. We visited our favorite little restaurant and chatting with Connie lifted me up. The burger with potato wedges might have helped also. And just like in the jam 4 months prior, loose associations suddenly led to an epiphany.
Ein Raum, in dem du Puzzle lösen musst, oder mehrere Puzzles, und der hat Geheimtüren, die dann aufgehen, und irgendwo ist ein Geist am Schluss, wenn du alles gelöst hast. Den musst du bekämpfen mit einer Waffe, die du am Anfang findest. Ich glaube, jetzt habe ich.
The situation called for a celebratory coffee before heading home. Just a small one. Make it grande. I was a little behind to get back to coding, but at least I had an inkling of how to start now. The whole ghost story theme was right in my ballpark, being a huge Lovecraft fan. Like tremendously huge. I discovered his works through playing the original Alone in the Dark, and I even made a video about him a couple of years back. Check it out if you want. As I have mentioned in my prior videos, I just can't work with featureless placeholders. I was well aware that I wasted precious coding time, but that's just how I roll. I have learned nothing. As a nod to Lovecraft, I loosely based my character on his likeness, within my ability, and animated a little walk cycle. On behalf of animators worldwide, I hereby apologize for using the term walk cycle to describe my infantile scrawls, which are not and never can be on par or even close to the work of any real animator. Any claims I had made prior that I animated are thereby false, unsubstantiated, and I deeply regret my misleading choice of words. With profound humility, I will now proceed to shamefully slap myself with my copies of the Animator Survival Kit and the Illusion of Life. So let's just say I drew some poses that when played back in succession looked vaguely like a person walking. Next up was character movement and having Howard interact with the environment. Enabling the player character to move around was pretty straightforward, but the conceptual setup of object interaction was initially a bit cumbersome. After some back and forth, I settled on having each environment object own the lines they would prompt the character to say upon interaction. I lost some time with untangling my code and weeding out all the fruitless approaches. But investing in legibility saves you headaches when the deadline is looming over you later. I always found it very charming how some old 16-bit games voiced their characters with a little sample that roughly hinted at the speaker's character. I wanted that too, and my typewriter object supported this. I just had to record a sample. So I kept polishing this basic object interaction with the text prompt instead of implementing the ghost catching stuff, but that's okay. With some ginger beer desperately substituting for coffee, I kept on adding different kinds of interactable objects to my stilted character in the blue void. The chunk of time I had scheduled for that night would be the only chance I had to get the bulk of programming done, so I had to make it count. As I toiled on the code, a sublime horror was creeping up on me. I knew of its existence, but consciously ignored it. Its name was gameplay. I had no idea how to pull off this whole ghost-busting and combat mechanic in the time I still had, so I actively ignored deadline and player experience and instead tried to make the walls look real pretty. This is fine! At 3 AM it was halftime again. With so much time lost on misguided polish, I needed to catch up and play to my strengths with a low effort method for a creepy atmosphere. The cheap and easy way to make something look spooky is to just turn off the lights. And that's exactly what I did. While my implementation of the torchlight is amateurish at best, it got the job done. The other necessary ingredient of mood is sound. I wanted to record a howling, droning atmosphere in the parking garage, but then again I didn't want to get up into the cold garage to scare the first commuters on their way to their cars. Music alone would have to suffice. I fired up Reason and my keys and toyed around with some strings and synths for a good hour until I had a usable loop to put in the game. With the new assets in place, Howard sounded way too cheerful and cutesy and clashed with what had become a dark game rather quickly. As another homage to the game's literary inspiration, I decided an actual old-timey typewriter stroke would be the best fit. Of course, we have one of these around. This is a portable typewriter from the 1930s, and it was the one I learned typing on before getting my hands on a real computer, which was a Commodore 64 back then. It's an heirloom of my dear grandfather, and I still enjoy typing on it from time to time. I just love how it sounds and feels. When recording sound, it's good practice to record more than you think you need, because more often than not, you end up using every scrap of what you got. Once I had covered pretty much all of the typewriter's moving parts, I didn't even stop when closing it up, even recording the creaking handle on the case. I edited my Foley in Audacity and experimented a little with it, tried different effects and some layering. A stroke, played back at a quarter of its original speed, plus some reverb, made for a great snappy flipping the switch sound. And the creaking handle, treated similarly on top, became the sound of the portal opening. The new sound effects now fit perfectly with the text, which didn't come as a surprise. The font I used in the game I had made from this very typewriter's types almost 15 years ago. I had named it after my dear grandpa, Hubert. The clock was approaching 7 AM fast and I was past my scheduled bedtime. But I was rather smug with the framework I had so far. Nice sound, bearable graphics, interactive objects and a text system. It was feature complete. Only the actual game was missing. Still. When I went to bed, I once again had troubles falling asleep. I was worrying about how and where to cram some game mechanics in, and what they should be. Sunday, 4 in the afternoon, 11 hours to go. The weather was dreary and a good fit for my sinking spirits. Our advent calendar cheered me up though. The 11th of December meant that it was my turn again to open the gift bag Connie had prepared for me. It contained a bar of soap, handmade by Connie, a chocolate gingerbread man, and a gamepad made out of chocolate. Talking about chocolate, in the fridge there was more. A lot more. Connie had really been busy. I'm just so lucky having found a fellow nerd to share my life with. Sadly, I couldn't stay at home to leisurely work on the game and stuff myself with chocolate. I still had a job to take care of first. I wanted to get it done as quickly as my skill permitted and return to the stub of a game. Once arrived, I used the time it takes my workstation there to boot up to kick my resolution in the bin for good. I do just fine without coffee, really, but I needed a boost to help me finish quickly. It's no addiction, I swear. With precious caffeine streaming through my veins, I got into a good flow of working, watching GDC talks on my notebook as the hours ticked away one by one. In the end, I even managed to finish a bit earlier than anticipated and hurried home. I almost forgot my camera. I left the place as empty as I had entered it 7 hours prior and vanished into the night, with not a lot more than 3 hours left to the deadline. Driving on deserted roads through the darkness on a relentless timer felt surreal, and in hindsight was like role-playing Yahtzee's game, The Consuming Shadow. I was now that lone paranormal investigator, that poor soul trying to fend off the inevitable while gradually losing his mind the more he learns about what he got himself into. Back home, I stocked up on coconut water, sat down at the screens, and forced myself to slow down, to concentrate, to recalibrate myself for what was ahead. 2 minutes to midnight. It was then, on a whim, that I decided on a very simple toggling puzzle. Each symbol represents a different aspect or deity, and all the player had was the goal to open the portal, and a nebulous clue. Players would need to inspect all symbols and learn Eldritch lore to operate the correct switches. Coming up with those little pieces was the most fun creative writing I had in months, and within 5 minutes I had all the necessary strings in the game. There was Seth Cassius, the prophet of mosaics, never right, but also never quite wrong. Yar Kubre, sun goddess with 2 servants, or the never-ending, the never-beginning, the eternal Zu. In my crunch mode, I crammed some performance-guzzling hacks into my code to make the game work until submission hour. Too short on time, I went back and forth between writing the description and coding the final touches so it wouldn't crash and still be beatable. I had to compile and upload twice because I forgot to switch off the debugging overlays and cheats, of course. In good tradition, I made a little icon and a title card for the LD website, recompiled everything with the icon again, and re-uploaded it. It was done. God, it was done. Looking again at my initial schedule, I wasn't that far off in terms of hours spent, but the majority of it was coding and very ill-advised polishing on the go. This permitted absolutely no time for testing. When I played the game for the first time 60 minutes past the submission hour, this became painfully apparent. I had a plot-stopping bug and a staggering amount of typos and mistakes in the little text the game had. So I recompiled and re-uploaded it a 4th time. There are still some glitches and typos in it. It just never ends. This was the 4th or 5th time I had participated in the jam. And that allows me now to identify a couple of trends in my game dev, especially when I compare this experience with the last. Each time I hate the theme. Each time I miraculously come up with an idea 14 hours later. Each time I spend too long on polishing my art. Each time I wrestle with making my prototype with a moving character into a game with actual mechanics. Each time I don't really have a fail state. Each time I'm underwhelmed with the outcome. And each time the game is very different to my initial vision due to the number of concessions I was forced to make. I was well aware that I had now another game that wasn't that fun to play. My only chance was that the atmosphere kept people's interest for long enough to evaluate what was there. And once the ratings were in, I was more than pleasantly surprised to see my game in the top 10 in mood and in the top 20 in sound. I liked my atmosphere, but I never thought people find it that good. Wow, thanks! With that positive feedback through the voting, I might even pick it up again, expand the game and try to find something original in it. For the future, I'm a little worried that I might get stuck in my trodden tracks, given my very similar experiences. I worry a bit that an LD jam becomes like a routine job for me, to churn out terribly boring, unoriginal games, but with nice music. Or maybe it was just a lack of coffee. Yeah, that's probably it. Or maybe the theme just sucked.